Welcome back aboard Arabella. After almost 6 months in the water, it was time to haul out in Rockland, Maine, to take a look at the state of the paint below the waterline. If you're seeing us for the first time, go ahead and subscribe to watch Arabella's story unfold every week. And we'd sure appreciate it if you could help support the project on Patreon.
It's not as bad as you think either. It'll be fine.
Didn't expect that. Huh. We got some work to do, George.
Steve and George got right to work on the starboard side, scraping away the seam compound and grinding away at whatever paint was no longer clinging to the hull.
Huh? What? What do you want? Kiva. What? Do you need to go outside? Is that it? Do you want to go outside? You turn the camera on and you stop talking? Haven't seen this site in a while. So we got Arabella hauled so that we can put a new zinc on the prop and repack the stuffing box and give her a quick scrub, but it has churned into more than a quick scrub. So this is where the zinc should be. So I take these 3 set screws out, put the new zinc on. And as you can see, we are scraping and sanding a lot of the bottom paint off of Arabella. And the reason for that is you can kind of see it right here. So we've got ridges of seam compound at every single seam that was below the waterline, as the planks have swelled and they've squished the seam compound out, and it's creating blisters in the paint. So this is not what we want to see. So obviously this bottom paint is not providing a ton of protection right now, and this isn't surprising. I knew that this was going to happen to some degree or another, but I'm a bit surprised at how much it has happened. So you can see these huge ridges of seam compound. So all these little lines are all cracks in the paint. And that is, one, because of that seam compound pushing out and letting water back there and starting it to blister. But two, all of these planks expanded. They all got bigger. And imagine painting a piece of rubber and then stretching it. And that's essentially what happened. And the paint did the best it could, but the wood was just moving too much. And this is not something that's going to become a long-term problem, because the Arabella, as long as we keep her in the water, is going to swell once, and all of this will be more stable, and the seam compound shouldn't come out, and the paint will have a much easier time sticking. So it is a bit cold out. It's pretty late in the season to be doing this, but we can't leave it like this all winter. So we gotta do what we can to get some paint on her. So what we've been doing is going along with a putty knife and just scraping all of the excess seam compound off. And then coming back with a bit more aggressive scraper. And just going until there's nothing left, or what is left seems really well adhered. So some places we don't need to worry about it at all. One of those places is the ballast keel. It didn't shrink or swell because it's lead. The paint didn't crack or flake at all. Same thing anywhere where there's bronze, paint's fine there. And it's mostly concentrated along the plank edges, and it's not quite so bad in the middle of the plank, and it's worse on big planks like the garboard here. You know, this is one massive plank, so that ended up moving a lot, and the paint's coming right off. Where if we come up to some of the narrower planks, it's coming off on the edges, but it's not quite so bad in the middle. So we want to get all this off. If we don't, it's going to continue to flake and blister, and subsequent layers of paint are going to peel off. If we had 3 or 4 good coats of paint on the boat that weren't moving, and we put a layer of paint on and the last layer was flaking a little bit, I wouldn't worry, because we'd still have protection. But we need to make sure that this base coat is on there really well. So that is the mission, is get this thing scraped, get it painted, get the zinc on, get the stuffing box restuffed, and get back in the water and make our way south. And if nothing else, doing all of this is going to give us at least a knot of speed. It's going to make a big difference. So here we have what's already been done. We still have paint, but it's not chipping. It's nice and firmly attached. And I know the wood looks a little rugged, but it is totally fine. And most of this black that you're seeing is not actually mold. We put down a layer of black thinned paint as our primer, so that if the paint had held up, we would be able to just kind of sand back down till we saw black and know that the base coat was on. So that's why the wood looks a little black and a little moldy. It's just that black paint. In some places it's left a little bit, and some places we've kind of come down to bare wood again. And the seams got tiny. Tiny, tiny, tiny. They got so tight. Look at that. I don't even know if you'd be able to add cotton to some of these. They're so tight. Oak swells right up.
We're gonna call Kristen at Total Boat and talk to some tech support because we are pushing the limits of the paint, and I kind of want to know what their thoughts were about why the issues we have, and see if what I think and what they think are the same. Hey!
Hey Steve, how are you?
I'm not too shabby. A little chilly up here in Maine.
A little bit. Yeah, right.
I guess if we rewind here, we painted the boat in May and June, and we used the Spartan bottom paint, and we followed the directions. So we used the Spartan thinned as the base coat and freshly sanded wood, used the thinner to wipe away all the residue, basically followed it to a T. And everything seemed really good. We launched the boat. We've been in the water about 5 months or so, and we just hauled, and all of the dry oak planking swelled. So where I had, I don't know, quarter, 3/8 of a gap between outside plank edges with the caulking bevel have shrunk to a 1/16 or an 1/8. They've like almost slammed shut. And throughout this process, what seems to have happened is the paint just is like flaking and chipping off. And as we've been kind of scraping it off, it seems like it's worse right along those plank seams. And then
that's exactly what I would expect too.
And then it's not as bad in the middle of the planks, and planks that are like wider, like the garboard's almost a foot tall, like all of the paint checks off of that thing. I would think that we didn't do anything wrong and the paint did what it was supposed to do, and it was really just a factor of it being a new boat and new oak and just all of that moving and getting settled and wreaking havoc. But I wasn't sure what you thought, or if there was some piece of that puzzle I'm missing, because like the paint on the ballast keel is perfect, absolutely perfect.
Everything you said sounds good. I mean, if you're seeing, which is very common for A for a new build of a wooden boat, but B, just wooden boats in general, there's quite a bit of flex. It's very common to see a heavy amount of flex initially, and that would absolutely, like you said, be like putting on rubber, pulling it, and then, as expanding and contracting, the paint cracks. And like you said, it's happening around the edges, which is like cutting to the point. I mean, that is where those edges are contracting. That's where the paint's flexing, that's where it's cracking, and that's the moisture's getting underneath and causing the rest to crack and flake, etc.
Yeah.
So everything you said sounds really good to me.
What happens if we put the paint on and it's just too cold? Is it not going to adhere? Is it not going to harden up? Like, is it just going to flake off? Like, kind of what could we? I know these are far from ideal, but we don't have much of a choice at the moment.
Right. So in the extremes. So like when it's significantly below the minimum temperature, you will see where it will just have trouble curing. It just won't cure. But when you're pretty close, a lot of times it just takes longer to cure. So It takes a longer time to cure before it can be launched. You could be talking the difference between 16 hours and the difference between a few days to fully dry.
Oh, wow.
The moisture, if there was issues with heavy moisture, you would see a more immediate failure of the coating. So if there was too much moisture, you would see the coating be rejected pretty quickly. So
if the wood's too wet?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So good to get your heater on in there and maybe blast it a little extra before you start applying paint.
Help dry it out a little bit more.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the info, and I'm glad to know that my hypothesis for why we're seeing these paint issues is also what you think would be causing the paint issues.
100%. Agreed 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, that steam compound will be popping that paint right off.
Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you guys getting the supplies to us so fast. I can't believe that I called you and was like, my bottom paint's peeling, I need to fix it now. And less than 24 hours, we had everything sitting here. So thank you so much. With everything I've got going on and I'm trying to figure out and all these surprises, that and the tech help is a huge support. So thank you.
Just make sure you always sail within a 1-day delivery of Total Boat.
Yeah.
Stay close.
Stay close to home.
Akiva's become famous at the coffee shop.
Yep. Oh.
Well, I'm on my way to Hamilton's for the second time today, the 10th time since we've been here. They've been really awesome. They've had most of the stuff that we've needed, and they've just been really helpful with knowledge and whatnot. And I showed up today with a couple cans of Total Boat paint, which they don't sell, and they were real quick. They're like, "You want us to shake them for you?" And I was like, "Yes, I do. That's exactly why I came." So shout out to Hamilton Marine. They've been really awesome, and they're walking distance from Journey's End. So if you're doing work here, it's super handy.
While waiting to see how warm they could get it under the tarps, Steve taped off a new water line that would raise it by about 8 inches, which will protect the hull well above where Arabella is sitting in the water.
Plastic strips on the rudder held up really well. They were covered in marine growth, but it came right off. So we'll put some paint on there and see if it sticks. And then behind them, you can see we've got a little bit of growth, but not bad. And all of that copper and phthalate paint is really doing its job. So we're in pretty good shape back there. I'm not worried about any of that. And George came to go sailing, and instead he's been scraping bottom paint and working in the cold, and he's been a rock star. This would take him way longer without George. Thank you, George. Can't tell you how much I appreciate this. And we are up to 46. And the directions on the cans say we need a minimum of 40. So I think we are about ready to mix up some paint and to get going.
While waiting for a coat to dry, Steve visited a nearby boathouse where the historic schooner Hindu is in the last stages of a full restoration. Hindu was built in 1925, designed by William Hand Jr., and started life as a private yacht. During the Great Depression, she went to India and picked up a load of spices, as well as the name that stuck to her for nearly a century. Commandeered by the Navy during World War II to scout for German U-boats, Hindu returned to civilian service in Provincetown as part of a charter sailing business and helped pioneer the East Coast whale watching industry. John and Aaron, who are spearheading the project, are hoping to put one of the longest-serving charter vessels on the East Coast back into service soon. Check the video description for links if you'd like to know more about Hindu. They're also looking for leads on teak if anyone has a line on about 1,000 board feet. They'd love to hear from you.
So here's our anode. That's what it used to look like. And it's gone. So I had to take these set screws out, clean up the crud here a little bit, and install a new one.
In trying to determine why the zinc eroded away so quickly, Nigel Calder, during his visit, thought that the packing material for the prop shaft that Steve used might be made with graphite, and therefore conductive. So now is the time to swap that out.
So I've pulled the stuffing box apart, and in case you don't remember, we've got the bronze fitting that Joe the machinist and I made that bolts onto the stern post. The prop shaft goes through here. And they have this really strong rubber hose with these really strong hose clamps, and that joins the stuffing box, which is this assembly, onto the stern post. And the water is inside here, but the packing material at the stuffing box here keeps the vast majority of it from coming out. There is water down here, and there always will be, because this is meant to drip a little bit. It needs to have a little bit of water flow through there. What this hose does is allows the stuffing box to flex ever so slightly. So that helps with making sure things are aligned, and that also helps when you throw it in forward or into reverse or whatnot. Instead of the stuffing material getting cranked one direction and the other super fast, it still does, but a little bit of that is taken up by the flex in the hose. So this is a very common assembly. And this is what came out. So this is 1/4 inch packing. To me, it looks like Duramax when I went to Hamilton, but I can't quite be sure. Should have kept better records of this when you put it in. What happens is this little piece goes around the shaft, and then it slides into the housing here. And this slides up and you crank it. And then as this threaded portion goes in, it squishes that packing around the shaft. And then this is your lock nut to keep it from unscrewing or tightening or anything that it wants to do. So this is what Nigel thinks is potentially causing the galvanic action. And without being 100% sure of what this is made of, we can't totally rule it out. So the best way to rule it out is to replace it with PTFE flax. So this is flax packing, which is super traditional. It is definitely not going to cause any issues with galvanic, and it should last a good long time. Maybe not as long as the Duramax, but honestly with how much we're motoring, this should last a really long time, and it's not difficult to replace. So no kind of reason not to use it. And then on the directions for this, it says to use a little bit of this lubricant. So I think this is enough lubricant probably for the rest of Arabella's life, but that's how it comes. And since that packing that I took out is in really good shape, we can use this to start, take some of the guesswork out of how big this needs to be. I'm gonna cut it just a little long. Instructions. Simply coat the shaft packing on all sides with a liberal amount of lubricant and install. Well, it seems simple enough. Oh, there we go. Now we bet. Right, I'm gonna slide out and go wash these real quick. I'll be right back. I used this strap wrench to take it off. It worked pretty well. This is not something we want Herculean tight. So that's snug, not crazy tight. And then crank the nut up against it. I'm going to go out and grab the prop and make sure that the shaft spins freely. I can't grab the shaft and spin it in here. I can't get enough grip on it, but I can certainly do it with the prop. So make sure that that spins and that this isn't binding it up for some reason. We'll fire up the motor when we're back in the water, motor a little bit, and I'll come check this. I want to make sure that this isn't getting really hot, because if there's a lot of friction on that packing, it can start to heat things up in here, and we don't want that. And I can make sure that this is dripping just a tiny little bit, but that it's not leaking a ton of water. And if I come down and it's leaking a lot of water, it's just a simple matter of loosening the lock nut and tightening this a little bit, squishing that packing. And if I go to turn the prop and it feels too tight, or if this starts to generate heat or isn't dripping a little bit, then I got to loosen the packing. So just loosen the lock nut, and loosen this nut a little bit, and tighten the lock nut back up. So it's pretty simple, pretty old school, but it works really well. So that is off the to-do list.